Hello, friends. Good morning. Welcome to the Tell It Like It Is podcast, and I'm your host, Alexi Bailey. And today I have Shannon K. Winston, the author of The Girl Who Talked to Paintings. Hi, Shannon. How are you today?
Hi, I'm great. It's really nice to be here.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm very excited about your first book.
My first full-length book, yeah.
All right. I'm so excited. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So I'll just say it's an ekphrastic collection. And what that means is that a lot of the poems are based on artwork and the speaker's engagement with work of art, mostly, as you probably suspect, paintings, but not only paintings. There's some photographs in my collection as well as sculptures.
So it's all your work?
It's all my work. And I think some of the themes of the collection include loss, speakers in search of themselves, and artwork becomes the medium through which they make discoveries about themselves, about their gender, about their family histories.
What's one of the pieces that stand out to you?
I think in terms of artwork, I love Salvador Dali. So he has a wonderful painting called Figura in una finestra. And it's a picture of a woman looking out of a window. And that really caught my attention in thinking about all the possibilities that we see out of our own windows and kind of encounters with the world.
So you wrote an adjacent poem about that?
I did, yeah.
So the poetry, the art inspires your thought, and your thoughts inspired poetry.
Exactly. And part of the conceit of the collection is in my poetry workshops, a lot of my mentors kept on saying, you know, your description is great, but we would really like to see more of the speaker on the page and what the speaker is thinking. And I started thinking that part of the problem of my speakers is an inability to express themselves or a shyness to kind of assert themselves in the world. And so the conceit is also, what if my speakers have imaginary friends in paintings, or find moments in paintings where they feel comfortable expressing themselves?
I see. And what has been the reaction so far?
It's been great. It's been really, really positive. And I've had my mentors have helped me so much making, with the revision process and helping me make this into a book. Sorry, my dog is outside.
That's okay. So what do you do in your full time?
I am a lecturer in the Princeton writing program, and I teach academic writing.
So you consider yourself an artist?
I do, yeah, an artist and a teacher. And I think I consider myself both things, because I would love to think of myself, and do think of myself, as always a student of poetry. I think there's so much to learn, and I've learned so much from people. So it's a continual process, I think, of writing, learning, writing some more, and improving as a poet.
So initially, was your thought a book, or were you just writing poems that you felt inspired to write?
I think at first I wasn't really thinking, I always dreamed of writing a book, but it was very abstract. And so I found myself writing poems about artwork. And then it was pretty funny, because this book was initially part of my MFA thesis. I was at the program for writers at Warren Wilson College, and I kind of panicked, because I thought, oh well, I don't have poems that work together. And I hadn't even realized that many of my poems were about artwork. And so it took me a minute to go back to my poems and think about how they fit together. And then I thought, oh, right, art is what combines all of the poems and links them together.
What was your process like? I'm sure there were certain things you had to exclude. So what was the process like deciding what to include?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had some poems that were doing similar work. So I have a couple of poems, for example, that in addition to being about artwork are about my own relationship to speech and language. Growing up, I had a speech impediment. And so I had maybe 4 or 5 poems about that. And it was really a matter of thinking, okay, it wasn't necessary to include all 5 in the collection. So which poem is the strongest and how does it speak to other poems in the collection?
So what would you give us some of the underlying themes?
So yeah, some of them include the speaker's absent father and kind of thinking about loss, and the speaker didn't really grow up with a father figure, so kind of coming to terms with that. And then also gender and sexuality, sort of the speaker is coming to terms with her own sexuality and gender, and really kind of thinking about what for her qualifies as a fulfilling life apart from kind of societal pressures. Um, and then also language and finding oneself, not only in relation to the canvas, but in relation to speech and what it means to make not only identity-based statements, but also statements of belonging and place.
So when you say the speaker, are you identifying yourself as the speaker?
That's a great question. Yes and no. So I would say that my own and well, 2 things. I think I do kind of default into the speaker in the singular, but I think there are many different voices that are related to one another. And then going back to your question, I use my life and my experiences as springboards, but there's a lot of fiction and a lot of imagining. And I think that's what I liked about the artwork, because it allowed me to use my own life as a point of departure, but also imagine other things as well.
When would you say the body of work was completed?
Well, I would say I'm smiling because I would say maybe the night before I submitted it for this contest, I revised and re-revised and revised again a lot, and I submitted this book to about 30 different contests. And much of the response, because there are so many wonderful books out there, I got very standard rejections from many places. And then a few places said, try again. We really enjoyed your manuscript. And those notes kept me going, but I knew that there was something that wasn't really working in the collection as a whole. And so one of the latest or last revisions I made before submitting it was changing the order of the poems. And creating new sections. And I think that really changed people's reading experience of the collection.
So how would you encourage someone to read this?
I think and hope that there's a lot in here for people in terms of the different themes of family and the others that I mentioned, but also I hope art lovers like it as well, and people who've been engaged with the art world. And I should say that one of my poems is about a shark in a formaldehyde tank, and then I also have more traditional artwork. And so I really had a lot of fun kind of thinking about different kinds of art. And I hope that this would inspire someone to really think that it's possible to make poems and make art out of anything, be it something that you find in the museum or something that you encounter on your walk home.
So you submitted this to the editor about when would you say you completed this? When was it complete?
So it was completed last August, and I submitted it to an open reading period at the end of August. It was accepted, I believe, in October of last year. So the whole process took about a year.
So first of all, where can we find this book?
So it's on Amazon. And you can also find it directly from the Glass Lyre website. And then people can order it from their favorite local bookstores too.
Okay. So I was saying you submitted it in August. Mm-hmm. What has your creative process been like since then? Have you still been thinking about the book and the order and writing poems and getting inspired? And what has that been like?
Yeah, I would say I had one foot in this collection and then another foot in new poems. So I've taken a lot of great online classes and generated new material for my next project, which I don't know exactly what that will be. And that's very much writing poems that I like to write, and we'll see how that comes together. In terms of this project, I loved working with Glass Lyre. And so a lot of it involved looking at proofs, going back and forth with the editors, thinking about, I would say I didn't do too much in terms of radical revision once I started working with the editors, but I did think about things like changing a couple words here and there. Yeah.
I really like the cover.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did too. I was really, really happy with it. It's a cover art from the website Dreams Time, and Glass Lyre has an account with them. And so they kind of gave me free reign to choose the cover. And that was really hard, kind of deciding if I wanted like an abstract image or a picture of something more concrete. But I kept on, I looked at so many different images and I kept on coming back to this one. So I thought, all right.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is it. Can you share an excerpt for us?
Yeah, I would love to. So this is self-portrait in white while viewing Salvador Dali's Figura in una finestra. And this is the window painting I was talking about before. Like me, Dali hid his grievances in the hem of a girl's dress, in the thick blue stripes running down her back. In art, they call mistakes or amendments mid-stroke pentimento. I call them silence. 9 years old, I'm sitting by my father on the front porch, watching lightning slice the sky. We've run out of things to say. Me, his greatest regret. A daughter, not a son. Him, mine. A father I could no longer talk to. If grief were a color, it would be white. I'm sure of it. The girl in the painting leans against the windowsill. What was she thinking? The window opens onto the Mediterranean, a sailboat and mountains. In the glass pane, I glimpse the reflection of a small white house in the distance. If only I could step through the canvas, climb out the window and over waves to this threshold. I would turn the brass doorknob and feel my way through this strange, yet not altogether unfamiliar space. As my father recedes into the background, I would call the girl sister, this place my home.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I felt transported.
Thank you. That was my hope.
Yeah, in one, like I felt like I was in two places at once, right? I felt like I was in the painting of Salvador Dali, and I also felt like I was sitting on the steps with the character and the father. Mm-hmm. So at some points, you're looking out the window. At some points, you're thinking about the father and the daughter, and it's very compelling.
Thank you. And that's what I was hoping, that a lot of my poems capture this in-between space. And so that the canvas opens on to many different layers of narrative.
Do you include the artwork in addition to the poem?
I don't, but above, I should say above the poem and below the title, I include a reference to the work of art.
So this will inspire people to get more connected to art as well.
I hope so. Yeah, I think that would be a wonderful outcome.
And I have this visual now of the shark in Formaldehyde.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a Damien Hirst piece, and you can find it online. But yeah, I think my hope too is that people will read the artwork above the poems and then do Google searches and kind of see what it's all about.
They're definitely gonna have Google search numbers go up when book for sure. It's very it pulls you in, you know. The human story is definitely, you're doing a great job of just telling the story, right?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I try. Yeah.
What's your plans for the book now? What's the next step?
So I'm setting up some Zoom readings, primarily because of the pandemic. I hope in the spring that I can set up a few either indoor or outdoor venues. I have a launch, and that information, it'll be a Zoom launch, and I'll put that up on social media as well as on my personal website, which is shannonKwinston.com. And people can get the Zoom link directly from me. But I will say, I think doing readings during the pandemic is a little challenging. So I kind of take any opportunity I can. And I'm also teaching through the Kalamazoo Book Art Center an online class on ekphrasis, or writing poems about art, in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited about that.
And I'll definitely make your links available, and I'll share some links to your stuff, and we'll definitely keep talking about the work and all of these things. So releasing a book in the middle of a pandemic is a struggle within itself.
It is. Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of poets have struggled with how to get the word out and how to do readings. And many bookstores have huge backlog now of readers who they promised and sort of lined up could read, and then the pandemic hit, and then they had to postpone or reschedule. And so one thing that I really appreciate out of all of this is that fellow poets and fellow writers have been really good about supporting each other through the pandemic, buying books, attending Zoom readings. I think it can be challenging because Zoom is a friendlier format than, I can't go to California, but I can log on to Zoom. But the problem with that is that then in any given day, there could be 5 to 7 Zoom readings. And I think people are also getting a little zoomed out, which is fair.
I think the pandemic is definitely leading us into new creative waters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And new ways of getting people out there. I gave a poetry reading on Zoom a couple of weeks ago, and it was really neat because it was part open mic and part reading. And so I read with someone else at the beginning, and then people were able to share their work. And so it's great in terms of bringing communities together as well.
Yeah, technology, I think, is the future. And I think Zoom allows us to, I know Zoom existed before the pandemic, but most of us weren't really using it at all, if any.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So now I think the pandemic is teaching us new technology, new ways to connect and broaden our horizon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I always wanted to start my show, and the pandemic kind of gave me tools, with the Zoom and online opportunities to really say, all right, do it this way.
Right.
And it's helped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you talked about identity and growing up and all of these things. Can you talk about the flow and how the flow from the beginning lead you into that?
Yeah. And tell me if you want more information, because I think there are so many different ways of going with that question. In terms of identity, personally grew up in, I was raised by a single mom, and where I went to school, there weren't that many single parents. And so it was both a point of shame for me at a certain time and something that I struggled with. It was why am I growing up with a mother who's terrific, but also my father wasn't really in the picture. And so kind of coming to terms with that. And I was in middle school around that time. And so kind of thinking about that, I moved to France as a child, which was a wonderful, wonderful experience. But then I landed in Paris and didn't speak a word of French. And so it was sort of like one of those, like, who am I? Where am I? How do I express myself in language? And all of these themes kind of come up in the book as well. And then in terms of my own sexuality, I'm gay, and that kind of took a while to sort of realize and to think about that in relation to social pressure and social norms. In terms of the way that the book is structured, I would say that these themes kind of resonate and echo one another, but it's not in a linear way. And in fact, I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that I rearranged the book, and the book had been very linear, sort of going from start to finish. And I realized it wasn't really working because I had a lot of the same themes in the same places, and I could feel the potential for my readers to get kind of bored or stuck, or like, okay. And then, of course, there's the imaginative element. So I would say those are the underlying identity themes of the book as well.
So does the character, I'm assuming there's a beginning of lost, and then there's a middle of, finding, and then some kind of conclusion?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's moving from feeling shame and confusion and a lack of sense of self, and I should fit into this narrative, or I should fit into that narrative. And then really kind of thinking about, okay, well then, rather than seeing all of these stories as inherently negative or as something to turn away from, sort of claiming struggle as character building.
So can you give me 3 pieces that kind of guide us that way, the art?
Sure. So I'll say, in terms of that, that's a good question, hard question. I would say definitely The Girl Who Talked to Paintings, the title poem, which is based on John Singer Sargent, Carnation, Lily, Lily, Rose. And that was a very important piece for me. And the backstory is that John Singer Sargent originally had painted a girl in the painting who had brown hair and brown eyes into the painting, but that didn't go with the aesthetic of the painting. And so he kind of swapped her out for a blonde girl with blue eyes. And that becomes, I work a lot with that in the collection, and kind of thinking about erasure and sense of self. But I also think that that's a turning point in the collection in terms of, the start of that poem is very much about loss. And then by the end, it's very much about an assertion of the self. So that's, and then also I would say, I don't know, it's such a hard thing. There are a few others, but I would point to that one as the main one.
So what role does the shark play?
So I have a shark and a fox in here. I think the shark is kind of thinking about staring into the void, because this is kind of thinking about the part of the title of Damien Hirst's sculpture is very long, but part of the title is the physical impossibility of, I'm going to abbreviate it, of looking at death. And so I think it's also like thinking about looking into a void and what kinds of creative possibilities we can make despite looking at something very scary or in terms of writing the blank page.
So much of our life is thinking about the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And leaving a legacy, and you talked about finding yourself and defining your life. And I can see how, we're all thinking about death, being kept alive,
mm-hmm.
and that whole embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
So you're staring at this shark in its entirety, looking alive, but it's also dead, and
Mm-hmm.
it paints this picture of what we're all kind of doing here.
Yeah, exactly. And also it ties back to the artwork in the sense of trying to animate something that is lifeless. Whether it's a figure in a painting or a shark in a tank.
Can you give us another excerpt?
Sure.
We'll probably do a total of 3 excerpts if that works.
Oh yeah, that's perfect. This is called Word Games and Space Travel, and it's based on a Michael Thompson painting called Girl with a Hole in Her Stocking.
How does that look?
So it's a really beautiful painting, a woman bending over to look at a tear in her stocking in the light. Yeah.
So what did you feel?
I think that's a great question. I think I was just, with all of these works, I was drawn to them and immediately attracted to, but the light and the composition, and the woman looked really contemplative. And so I kind of wanted to know what she was thinking. And so I think with all the pieces in the collection, I was drawn to them, and then I wanted to know why. And so what was it that I was imagining?
So much of as you gave me that, I started thinking about, women's, the work that women go through for beauty,
mm-hmm.
and constantly having to, put on, dress up, and make themselves more than what they naturally are.
Yeah.
The self, you had the self-evaluation of that goes into,
mm-hmm.
and as a woman, you can't just show up to work as your natural self, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're shaving, you're covering your legs, a stocking, a pants. Does this look?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are all themes that are very much present in here. Yeah. Okay. Word games and space travel. A hesitation, a hole, a rip. Sometimes my thoughts proceed like this, like a teasing at the seams where one thread loosens, then another, only to contract elsewhere. The way I think splinter, then sister. Oh, the association games she and I played to pass the time. Fall, she'd say. Trampoline, I'd reply. Almond, eye, telescope. What do you see? A blue earring lost in the baseboards. Through our games, it morphed into a blueberry, a raindrop, a lake big enough to swim in. What do you feel? Felt, cloth, velvet. My tongue explored each word, probing the space between letters. Space, a blank, to space, to forget. Outer space, me and my sister, two astronauts tasked with discovering dark matter, Big Dipper's, Orion's belt, all of it hidden in a C or an O, galaxies nestled in unsuspecting letters. Even now, as my fingers pick at snags in my nylons and pull, unravel, gravel, travel, to glimpse what lies beneath, behind, beyond. Thank you. Thank you.
Whew. I felt a little girl sitting at her mom's legs, or just the piece of, the timelessness of childhood, and a reflection on the good old days.
Yeah, absolutely. And having fun with traveling, in the imagination through different spaces, and kind of thinking about how the painting inspires the speaker to think about her childhood, and then the childhood that is structured around games and play. And so this one was really fun for me to write, in terms of going from picture of a woman with stockings on to sisters to outer space, back to the stockings. And so I loved the travel in this poem. Was really fun.
There's also a sense of like the girl before the stockings, and then the girl growing up and now she's wearing the stockings.
Yeah.
How did you get the outer space?
That was not in the original poem, but the original poem was called Word Games and Space Travel. And I had someone read the poem, and they said, well, that they liked the title, but they really didn't see it making much sense because there wasn't any mention of space. And so I found myself wondering, like, is there a way for me to incorporate outer space? Because I really like the idea. I just hadn't, kind of made the poem, kind of pushed it to the next level, so to speak.
But you felt an outer space vibe. So can you speak to that before you changed it, or?
Yeah, I think it's just sort of thinking about, I love wordplay. And so I was really interested in thinking about the hole in the stocking as kind of a blank space. And then I thought, well, what kinds of other spaces exist? And then that got me to outer space. But I think often, when I draft poems, or even when I think that they're done and they're not, I have this whole narrative that, or conceit that I want my readers to understand. And often I haven't put that on the page yet. So it's a matter of really going back and making that explicit.
Yeah, can you say a little more about the process? Like, how does this generally for you when you're writing poems? Do you sit down and say, now is my poem writing time? How does this happen for you?
Yeah, I usually write, if I can, in the morning, and first thing with my coffee. And I try to write a little bit each day, because otherwise it's too hard to get back into. And I took a lot of time off at a certain point. I did my dissertation in comparative literature, and I enjoyed that, but I think creative writing is where my passion lies. And I had taken 5 years off, and that was a very long time, and kind of sitting in front of the page and thinking, like, am I ever going to get back into this? And I really think of it kind of like a sport. You know, if you haven't been running for a while or doing your sport, you have to get back into it. But in terms of my writing process, I usually think of one line or an image, and then I kind of explore from there.
When did poetry and writing become your thing?
So I took a poetry camp when I say camp because I was in the 5th grade. I went to Carolina Friends School outside of Durham, North Carolina, and they were really invested in helping students gain an appreciation for creativity. And I would say that on and off throughout high school, I wrote poetry, and it was something that I enjoyed doing, but it was very much on the side since I had other requirements. And then, as I mentioned, I did a PhD, and I definitely I loved my program and department and loved my colleagues and learned a lot there. But I had this nagging feeling that I was really missing out on my true passion. And so when I moved to Princeton, I thought, okay, I'm going to take an online poetry class just to see if I even like writing poetry anymore, because I was asking myself that question. And I took the class and I loved it. And I applied to the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College and got in and did a low residency there. And that was terrific. And I haven't looked back.
So when did you take that online course?
The online course was in 2015, I believe.
So 2015, you took the online course. You felt like you still loved writing and poetry specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And then what exactly did you apply to do in that program?
So I applied to a low residency program, which was terrific. I loved everything about that program. And part of what I loved was a sense of community, even though we were apart much of the year. So in a low residency format, you're in residence for 10 days in January and 10 days during the summer, usually in June or July. And then in between times, you work with your mentors and submit your homework, so to speak, about once a month, and you get your feedback. But I think what was also helpful, in addition to working with wonderful people in the community, was that I really learned how to develop a writing practice while working full-time.
So when you applied to that program, what was your intention to get out of it?
To grow and learn as a writer and to be around other writers. I had joined a couple writing groups before that program, but they were kind of intermittent, and if people had time to meet, that was great. But then that kind of fizzled out. And I really kind of knew at the time that I had a lot of growing to do, and that although I loved poetry, there were some I won't call them weaknesses, but areas of development and things that I would benefit from learning.
So you felt like you grew on the page, so to speak?
Yeah, I grew so much, and all of my mentors really pushed me and kind of helped me identify both my strengths and then the things that I needed to develop. And I think, before that program, I always loved images, and distilling really beautiful images was what I liked doing. But a lot of my mentors pushed me to think about the stakes of the poems. Like, what are the stories I'm telling? Like, why is this poem important? Because I found myself just caught up in description. And I should say that that's also how I started working with visual art. I could just sit there and describe the visual art forever, but the piece of artwork already exists. So the question was, what am I bringing? What is the story I'm bringing to this piece of art? And why is it necessary to write this story in the first place?
Well said. I like that. So did you complete that program? Are you done?
Yep, I'm done. Yep, I finished in 2018. It was a 2-year program.
Got it. So out of that program came this book.
Mm-hmm.
So it was
Yep.
definitely a success.
Yes, yes, and lots of friendships, and I'm in writing groups with people, and I still correspond with my mentors. It's been great.
For some reason, I don't know why, I just thought about Anne Frank.
Mm.
Because so much of her diary is her life on a page. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a part of what you're saying is that you use art you use your writing as it's like a diary.
Yeah, I
And
think that's fair. I'm hesitating a little bit because it is half a diary and then half imagination and half there's a lot of fiction in here too, which is fun. So kind of like I think part of it is that some of these poems were ways for me to understand myself, both as a writer and as a person better. And so sometimes that meant taking a little bit of truth and a lot of fiction, or a lot of, or the inverse, to sort of think about narrative and crafting narratives around that. So I would say, yes, there's way more of me in this collection than before, and I'm really thankful for that. But there are also characters who I completely, and speakers I completely made up in as well.
but that's the beauty, right? The beauty is you're trying to tell a story. So you're using your imagination, you're using your experience, and the things you make up, or all of it, is to tell the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it's a diary in the sense of this is the story you're telling,
Mm-hmm.
these things.
Right. Yeah.
What was the biggest stretch of imagination in there?
Um, I don't know if I can point to one per se.
So it's really like
I
comment.
think I think the biggest stretch would be, I think part of it is that each, kind of going back to what I said before, each of the works of art I picked spoke to me and I didn't know why. And so the hardest thing to do was to think both why, and then what does this piece of art allow me to say about myself, and allow me to imagine about myself that I wouldn't otherwise be able to. And that was so hard, because it was, it's easier to say, at least for me, oh, I like this piece, oh, it's beautiful, but then asking, well, what is it? That's harder. What is it about the piece that attracts you, or why are you drawn to this? And what is it about your inner self that is responding in that way?
Which piece did you struggle the most with?
um I think so. There's a cabbage leaf. So it's a poem called Weston's Cabbage Always Wants and Makes Me Want to Cry. And it's a photograph of a cabbage leaf with a little tear in it.
Mm.
And every time I saw it, I was almost brought to tears, and I couldn't explain why. And I just found this photograph so poignant and beautiful. But then it was like, what is that? What is it about the composition that is attracting me to that?
I'm trying to think if we should share an excerpt from that, or have you tell us what you thought.
I will be happy. I just have to find the poem. So I would be happy to read from that one. Okay. Weston's cabbage always makes me cry. Edward Weston, cabbage leaf. It's something about the way the leaf droops onto the floor, the gelatinous silver, black on black. I want to console it, to lift up its leaves, to heal the spot where a vein broke. This is not about personification. Although some days the cabbage looks like a crumpled prom dress, which makes me wonder where the girl who wore it has gone. Does she even remember this dress? The one she put on layaway and bought later with a jar full of coins. To most, the fabric's white flocking resembled flowers, but to her, they were birds. Big, whooshing all around her, they lifted her higher and higher above the dance floor, transforming her clumsiness and shyness into a confident grace. This is what love must feel like, she thought, twirling. Love like the distant flapping of wings against blue taffeta. I had watched her dance, watched shadows skirt the walls as she threw her arms up over her head, a gesture of joy or drowning. I could not tell which. Even now, looking at Winston's photograph years later, I wonder, were those birds detaching themselves stitch by stitch from her dress, sinking their beaks into the ripest, most tender part of her flesh?
The prom dress.
Yeah. How did I get there?
Yeah, I'm blown away by the prom dress.
Yeah, I think I was trying to think of layers and layers of I think I love sort of thinking associationally. And for whatever reason, I thought of the layers of the cabbage leaf, and the veins of the cabbage leaf kind of looked like a dress. And yeah, that's kind of how I got there.
But that dress came to life.
Thank you. That was what I was hoping for.
Yeah, the ripest part of her flesh. I'm like, I need a minute to come back. Like, that was like a whole movie.
Well, good.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you get there?
I think I started just with the first draft was just the description of the cabbage leaf. And again, kind of going back to what I was saying to you before about needing to do more, I was thinking about, okay, well, what is a cabbage leaf? What does it look like? Like, what is the leap I could make? And the way that the cabbage leaf is drooping either to me looked like a sheet or a dress. And I found that I could do more with a prom dress than a sheet. So then I kind of moved from there into the imaginative realm of the birds.
So you're writing the birds, the dress, the girl. And I kind of felt at the beginning the cabbage leaf talking about like the person and character and development and healing. Mm-hmm. And then, what was that happening? And the dress, did the dress kind of evolve? Like, how do you experience it now?
Yeah, I think it, I'm really interested in how objects can really transport us back to particular moments of our lives. And it's like looking at, I don't know, an ornament or a decoration that takes us back to a holiday that we spent with our family. And then that moment sort of balloons onto either, an argument that we had with someone around that holiday or something. And so I kind of think of this poem as nesting dolls and kind of the trickle effect of thinking about, you know, different kinds of hurting and healing, I should say, right? Kind of thinking about the cabbage leaf as needing some kind of comfort because of the way it looks visually in the photograph, and then kind of thinking about, you know, where do my sympathies lie, and what kinds of scenes could I paint here. And this is a poem where much of it is imagined, right? And I think there's also, you know, but at the same time, I think my mother sent me my prom dress from Chicago, so it was sort of like a perfect confluence of events. And so I would say that a lot of this happened and came together through chance.
It was meant to be. I was also like taken in by the whole layaway and the payments and the coins and the piggy bank and.
Yeah, I think, you know, I had a couple poems about that, in part because it's something I used to do as a kid, not necessarily for a dress, but, you know, doing chores and kind of thinking about the value of money and how I wanted to spend money. And I remember my sister and I wanted to buy our mom a present for her birthday, and we bought her a cooking book from the bookstore, and my sister just like lugged her piggy bank with her, and she was on like at the cashier counting the pennies as part of her contribution. And so what it means to you know, not have a lot of money and kind of save up for certain things, and what that means.
Right. Totally. I totally feel the good old days, which is like a strong theme for me, and all of these things. So yeah, totally. Is there another important piece that you want to mention of the book?
I think that there's one piece, and I won't read it, but I think I have a couple poems that I loved writing, and they're language poems and definition poems. And so those are interspersed throughout the collection as ways of thinking about our own relationship to language and wordplay. You know, I think what I really appreciated in the writing process, and hope that my readers will also appreciate, is the different levels of experimentation in the collection. There are lots of different forms, and hopefully some of this will speak to readers as well.
Absolutely. Is there any specific poems about identity, gender, and sexuality?
Yeah, do you want me to read one?
Yeah, because that's like a very relevant thing right now.
Yeah. So this is an example of a poem that's very much based on my life, and also based on fiction. So I do not weave or spin. So we were talking about how the imagination meets reality.
And what's the art with this one?
So this differs, it's weaving and spinning. And so there are, I should say, most poems are responding to artwork, but not all. And this is one example. The Spinners. Early on, I learned how to put a spin on things. Something I picked up from the spinners in my hometown. Me, the quiet observer who watched artisans at fairs and in storefront windows, turning batting spool by spool into fine, magnificent strands. Magenta, turquoise, purple, the seamlessness of it all. A luscious tapestry I yearned to dive into. I wove the most eloquent deceptions. There are just too many guys to choose from. Or he's an economist who travels for work. How carefully I tucked away the strands that might betray me. I haven't found the right man, I told the vendor at the market, who asked about my family while selling me soap on purple wax paper. Some lies, too, were beautiful in their half-truths. No, she's just a good friend. I cherish those the most. She gave me a key so I could check on the plants. More and more, my words tangled in all the wrong places. When I blushed too much or smiled too little. When I was caught circling a block in a neighborhood that wasn't mine. My husband, too many guys, right man, friend. I tripped on invisible spools. Love, a plush knotted turquoise. At night, after cleaning away the lies, I reclined on wax paper and wove a tapestry syllable by magenta syllable, hoping it would sustain my weight. Thank you.
I love that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's so much of what, it was like imagery and, for some reason I saw a really small town, that soap on a wax paper. I'm like, that's like a really small town I just imagined.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. It says a lot, and it speaks to the culture and playing the game and dinners and
yeah. And a lot of the poems, whether they're about gender and sexuality or identity or anything else, in terms of the themes, a lot of it's about secrecy and about being afraid to really put yourself out there and needing to kind of craft a narrative that you think people will find perhaps less controversial or easier to digest. And so I think this was a really important poem for me to write.
Yeah, and it's very relatable, Yeah, I'm so glad that you shared that, and it's we need to find ourselves and as a culture just figure out how we grow. Like this, we're in an important stage right now where I think we're tackling things more head on than we have in the past. So this poem really speaks to what people have to go through, and even in our progressive times, there's still a lot of that, a lot of unspoken expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of inner censorship too, right? So it comes from both sides, and thinking about how to navigate that.
Shannon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your book. Can we see it again?
Sure. Here it is.
The Girl Who Talked to Paintings, Poems by Shannon K. Winston. Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you.
I look forward to reading it, and I'll definitely let you know what I think. And I'm so excited, and congratulations on getting it done.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Is there anything you want to share, like how someone can reach you or?
Sure, yeah. So my website is shannonKwinston.com, and I have contact info up on the website. So that's probably the easiest way. I'm also on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook.
Do you want your readers to find you on social media?
Sure, if they want to. Yeah, I have had a lot of writers reach out to me and friend me that way.
Yeah, I think in the age of social media, the good and the bad is that everyone's reachable, right?
Yes.
And you write a book, and we can also see what you had for lunch,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's I think it humanizes us more and makes us more reachable,
Mhm.
which is before you wrote a book and maybe you wrote a letter to a fan club or a letter to the editor that they might have got 6 months later, and now things are more instantaneous and you can really connect.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Yes. So much of what I believe in is the work in humanity finding itself and
Mhm.
humanity being in touch with itself and us kind of growing from our past of societal restraints and the norms that hold us back from being who we are.
Mhm.
Your book really speaks to that journey.
It does. Yeah. I'm invested in the same thing. So it's really, really nice to hear that we have a similar aim and project.
And I hope that I think we're all on that journey, but I think some people are just more in touch with it than others.
Mhm.
And I really try to use my platform to highlight that.
Yeah, which is wonderful.
People are on social media and you can easily get lost in whatever shell you're hiding in.
Mhm.
You can actually be on social media, on the internet, and actually be disconnected from what's really happening.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So as much as I try to stop the scroll and share real humanity with people, people are more like, well, what's the clickable moment? How can I,
Mhm.
and I really want to highlight the deeper complexity that we all share. And your book is something that I instantly gravitated towards. And I'm so glad that we're able to take this time and you were able to meet me here.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. It's been great, and I've appreciated taking time to reflect on the book with you.
Yeah. So if you want to stick around for part two, we kind of talk about other things other than the book and just the larger context of life and the journey. All right.
Yeah.
So I invite you in the audience to stick around for that. Okay.
Okay. Yes.